The moment my attorney told me to lie to my family, I didn't sleep for 3 days. Not because I was afraid of getting caught. Because I already knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, exactly what would happen when I did it. My name is Maya. I'm 29 years old, and until 8 months ago, I believed that the people who shared my last name were the people who would always have my back. I believed that the way you believe in gravity, you don't question it. You just assume it's holding you to the earth. My father died on a Tuesday morning in March. Cardiac arrest. He was 58 years old and the kind of man who fixed his own gutters and remembered every server's name at every restaurant he'd ever been to twice. He built a commercial landscaping company from a single secondhand truck and 30 years of early mornings, and by the time he died, the company had 14 full-time crews and contracts with 3 hospital systems across the state. He never talked about money. He talked about work. He used to say that the number in your bank account was just a reflection of how many problems you'd solved for other people. I was his only biological child. My mother passed when I was 11, and my father remarried 6 years later. My stepmother came with 2 children of her own. My stepbrother, who was 24 and had been between jobs for most of those years. And my stepsister, who was 27 and deeply committed to a lifestyle she had never once funded herself. I had tried, for a long time, to make it work with all of them: family dinners, holidays, birthday texts that sometimes got answered. It was never warm, but it was functional. The way a radiator with a slow leak is still technically a radiator. When my father passed, I was the one who handled the arrangements. I was the one who called the funeral home, chose the casket, wrote the obituary, coordinated with his business partner, and sat in the attorney's office 3 days later to hear the reading of his will. My stepmother sat to my left in a cream blazer she'd clearly bought for the occasion. My stepbrother sat beside her, scrolling his phone until the attorney cleared his throat. My stepsister called in remotely from what sounded like a coffee shop. The will left the company and the family home, which had been my father's long before he remarried, jointly to me and my stepmother, with a note that the final determination of majority stake would be handled by an independent trustee over the following 60 days. There was also a personal account my father had never mentioned. A private investment portfolio worth just over $1.4 million held in a separate institution, with me listed as the sole beneficiary. I did not react. I had learned early in life not to let people read my face. But I noticed my stepmother's jaw tighten when the number was read aloud. I noticed my stepbrother finally put down his phone. The attorney, a woman named Patricia who had handled my father's affairs for over a decade, asked everyone else to step out after the formal reading. She looked at me for a long moment after the door closed. Then she said, very quietly, "Maya, I need you to trust me on something. And I need you to do it before anyone in that family makes a phone call tonight." She told me to go home, wait 12 hours, and then send a group message to my stepmother and stepsiblings, saying that the estate review had uncovered significant undisclosed debts, that my father's business had a lien against it that predated the marriage, that the personal account had already been flagged by creditors, that there was, in practical terms, almost nothing left to distribute. I stared at her. She said, "I've seen this before. More times than I want to count. You're about to find out who your family really is. I'd rather you find out on my terms than theirs." I drove home in silence. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes. Then I went inside and typed the message exactly the way she'd outlined it, and I sent it, and I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and tried to breathe. By midnight, I had 47 unread notifications. My stepmother had called 6 times. My stepsister had sent a voice memo that I couldn't bring myself to play past the first 8 seconds. My stepbrother had texted a single word, "Seriously?" And then, at 12:43 the morning, my phone buzzed with a message from someone I hadn't expected. My stepsister's college roommate, a woman I'd met exactly twice at holiday gatherings, had somehow gotten my number. Her message was 3 words: "Call me now." Her name was Jess. And she was clearly not calling because she was concerned about me. She was calling because she was in a group chat with my stepsister and she thought I was someone else. She caught herself about 4 sentences in, went very quiet, and then said she had to go. But those 4 sentences were enough. She had said the word transfer and the phrase before the 60 days are up and my stepbrother's name twice. I took a screenshot of the message thread. I forwarded it to Patricia at 1:06 a.m. With a single line, "I think you are right." She responded immediately, which told me she hadn't been sleeping either. In the morning, my stepmother called again. I let it go to voicemail 3 times before answering on the 4th. Her voice was completely different from the voice I had heard in the attorney's office. Softer, measured, like she'd practiced it. "Maya, sweetheart, I know this is such a hard time for both of us. I've been thinking, and I really believe your father would have wanted us to handle everything together, as a family. Why don't you come by the house this week? There are some things we should probably sign off on together before the situation gets complicated. Things we should sign off on together." I told her I'd think about it. She said, "Wonderful. Come Thursday afternoon." I said fine. And then I called Patricia and told her every word. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thursday works. I'll be there." I spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended dread. The kind where you go through all the normal motions, coffee, work, groceries, and the whole time there's a weight in the center of your chest that reminds you that something is about to crack open. I worked my normal shifts at the clinic where I practice physical therapy. I helped a 72-year-old man learn to walk again after his hip replacement. I ate lunch alone in my car both days because I couldn't hold a conversation without my thoughts sliding sideways. I had grown up in the house I was about to walk back into. I knew every sound it made. The 3rd stair from the bottom had a creak that never got fixed. The back door stuck in the humidity. My father's office smelled like coffee and printer paper and the specific brand of cedar shoe polish he'd used my entire life. I had not been back since the day after the funeral, when I picked up some of his things and let myself cry in his closet for about 4 minutes before I told myself to get it together. Thursday came. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, watching the house the way you watch something before it changes. Patricia's car was not in sight. She had told me not to wait for her. She would arrive when the time was right. "Trust the process," she said. I thought about what my father would have said about that. He would have said, "You already know what you need to know, Maya. You just don't want to believe it yet." My stepmother answered the door before I could knock. She had clearly been watching for my car. She hugged me, which she almost never did, and the hug was the kind that presses without warmth, the kind that's really just a hand on your shoulder blades to steer you through the door. The house smelled different, cleaner than usual, like they had prepared for this. My stepbrother was at the kitchen table. My stepsister was on the couch, and she looked at me the way you look at someone you've already written a different ending for. No one offered me anything to drink. No one said I was sorry for your loss, though it was technically their loss too. My stepmother sat down across from me and folded her hands and said, "I know this is really difficult with everything that's happened financially. I just want you to know that we don't blame you. Estates get complicated. Your father, God love him, he wasn't always the most organized person when it came to paperwork." I watched her. She continued, "We've actually had a family attorney look at a few things, and there are some steps we think make sense to protect everyone. Your brother found some documentation that suggests the business valuation your father's attorney used might not be accurate, and if that's the case, there could be some liability questions that fall back on the estate." My stepsister uncrossed and recrossed her legs. "It's just about making sure no one gets caught holding the bag," she said, like she was explaining traffic to a child. My stepbrother slid a folder across the table to me without making eye contact. I picked it up. The first page had my name on it in bold at the top and the word release printed underneath in capital letters. Beneath that, in language that I had to read twice to fully absorb, was a relinquishment of my claim to the private investment account. In exchange for what was described as a fair market settlement, a number that was not written in, just a blank line, I would forfeit all rights to the funds my father had designated specifically to me. My hands were completely steady. I was surprised by that. I had expected them to shake. "This is a release of the personal account," I said. My stepmother nodded in a way that was clearly meant to seem reassuring. "It's just a formality, Maya. With the debts being what they are, it makes more sense to consolidate. And honestly, managing an account that size, when you're dealing with everything else, you want me to sign away the account my father left specifically to me. We want to handle this as a family, my stepsister said, and the word family came out of her mouth like something she'd rehearsed. My stepbrother had still not looked at me. He was picking at a spot on the edge of the table. He had, I now noticed, a separate folder next to him that he hadn't slid over, thicker. His hand was resting on top of it. I thought about the group chat I'd never been shown. I thought about the word transfer and the 60-day window. I thought about Jess calling me by accident in the middle of the night and the way her voice had changed when she realized her mistake. I thought about my father's closet and the 4 minutes I let myself cry in there and how I walked out and told myself that whatever happened next, I would not be someone who let grief make me stupid. I set the folder back on the table. I'd like to know, I said, what account you were planning to transfer these funds into. The room temperature dropped. My stepbrother's hand tightened on the folder beside him. My stepmother opened her mouth and closed it again. My stepsister made a sound that wasn't quite a word. And then the front door opened. Patricia walked in wearing a charcoal blazer and the expression of someone who has done this before and is not impressed. She was carrying a leather portfolio that she set on the table without ceremony, directly on top of the release document. Like the thing didn't exist. "Good afternoon," she said. "I apologize for the informal entry." Maya left the door unlocked for me. I had not, technically, but no one in the room was going to say that. My stepmother's composure cracked for just a second before she smoothed it back over. "Why is she here?" "Because I represent Maya's interests in your late husband's estate," Patricia said, and pulled the release document out from under her portfolio without looking at it, and because this document, which you've just asked my client to sign, constitutes an attempt to obtain a fraudulent waiver of beneficiary rights through misrepresentation of estate liabilities. My stepsister stood up from the couch. "That is not. The debts you described to Maya do not exist," Patricia continued, as if my stepsister had not spoken. "The business lien you referenced was resolved 18 months ago. Your father's estate is solvent. The personal investment account is legally, unambiguously, and exclusively hers." She opened the portfolio and laid out 3 documents in a row on the table. I recognized them as the kind of paperwork that has very official headers and a lot of small print that nobody in the room except Patricia had read. "What you may not know," she said, "is that over the past 60 days, while the estate has been under trustee review, someone attempted to access your late husband's secondary brokerage account using a power of attorney document that was never properly executed and, in fact, bears a signature that does not match the deceased's authenticated records." My stepbrother pushed back from the table so fast the chair scraped the floor. Patricia looked at him calmly. "The institution flagged it. We have the access logs." My stepmother's voice came out high and thin. "That was a misunderstanding. We thought." "You thought Maya had nothing," I said. "You thought I'd signed away the account before I figured out what you were doing. And you thought you had 60 days to move before the trustee review was final." The room was completely silent. My stepsister sat back down, slowly, like her legs had stopped working. I looked at my stepmother. I had spent a lot of years trying to read her face. In the beginning, after the remarriage, I had looked for something like warmth in her expression, some signal that she was willing to try. Later, I looked for honesty. Now I wasn't looking for anything. I was just looking at her clearly, the way you look at something when you've decided you're done wondering about it. Maya, she started. And I noticed the slip, the way her mouth had reached for someone else's name, someone more pliable, someone easier. "My father's estate review concludes in 4 days, I said. "Patricia has already filed a formal report of the access attempt with the institution and the state attorney's office. Whether or not you cooperate with the trustee from this point forward will affect how that report develops." My stepbrother looked at my stepmother. She looked at my stepsister. My stepsister stared at the table. Patricia laid 3 pens on the table next to the documents. "The first document," she said, "is a formal withdrawal of the release request and acknowledgement that it was presented under false pretenses. The second formally removes the secondary power of attorney filing from the estate record. The third is a notification to the trustee of your intent to cooperate with the final review. And if we don't sign," my stepbrother said. His voice had gone flat. Patricia tilted her head slightly. "Then the preliminary fraud report becomes a formal complaint, and the 60-day window that you've been working against becomes a window into 15 years of your stepfather's accounts instead. My stepmother picked up a pen. Her hand was shaking visibly. She looked at me one last time with an expression that I think she intended to be a plea, and that landed as something closer to resentment. "You're doing this because you've always resented me," she said. "You could never accept that your father had a new family. You've been waiting for this." I let her finish. I didn't feel what she expected me to feel. I had been angry in the weeks before this moment, but sitting here now, I felt something more like clarity. The particular kind of clarity that comes when something you secretly knew for a long time finally becomes something you know out loud. "I wanted a family," I said. "For a long time, I really did. I used to make excuses for the things that felt wrong. I used to tell myself that different people show love differently, and maybe this was just how you all did it. But you didn't love me differently. You just didn't." My stepsister opened her mouth. I didn't give her the space to use it. "I'm not cutting you out of anything that was legally yours to begin with. But I'm also not signing away what my father left me so you can cover your lifestyle. Sign the documents or deal with what comes next. Those are the only two options left." It was not loud. It was not theatrical. I kept my voice level, the way you keep your hand steady when you're helping someone learn to walk again after a long time down. Controlled. Intentional. Present. They signed. All three of them, in the order Patricia indicated, without further argument. My stepbrother was the last, and he set the pen down like he was setting down something much heavier, and was angry that he had to let it go. Patricia collected the documents and returned them to her portfolio with the efficiency of someone closing a case file. She thanked them for their time in a tone that made the word thank feel like it meant something else entirely, and then she nodded at me, and I stood. I walked toward the door. My stepmother called after me. Not with tears, not with an apology, with a statement. "You'll regret choosing a lawyer over your family." I stopped with my hand on the doorframe. I didn't turn around. "You chose money over your daughter before I even walked in the room. I'm just the one walking out." Outside, the afternoon was overcast and cool, and the smell of spring mud was coming up from the yard where my father had kept his garden for 30 years. Patricia fell into step beside me on the driveway. "You did well in there," she said. "I didn't feel anything," I told her. "Is that bad?" "No," she said. "It means you already grieved the right things." I believed that. Or I was starting to. 3 days later, I was in Patricia's office for the final review meeting when she told me there was one more thing. She said it the way you say something you've been holding back deliberately. Like she'd been waiting for the right moment. She reached into a lower drawer of her desk and placed a plain white envelope on the surface between us. My name was written on the front in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere, in any context, at any hour of the night. My father's handwriting. I stared at it. "He gave this to me 8 months before he passed," she said. "He told me to hold it until the estate was settled and you had seen what you needed to see." His exact words were, "Give it to her when she's ready to believe it." I picked it up. It was light. 1 or 2 pages at most. I broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside, and for the second time in my life, the first being those 4 minutes in his closet, I let myself cry in front of someone without apologizing for it. He had written it in the fall. He knew his heart was unreliable. He had never said that to me, but he had apparently said it to Patricia and to himself and to this letter. He wrote that he had watched me for years and understood more than he had ever told me about the dynamic in his house. He wrote that he had tried, for a long time, to believe that blending a family was something that could be managed with patience and enough time, and he had been wrong, and he was sorry that I had absorbed most of the cost of that mistake. He wrote that the personal account had been set aside specifically for me for 11 years. That it had been growing quietly in the background, not because he expected to die, but because he had always known that I would need to be protected from people who thought his love for me was a financial threat to them. He wrote, "Maya, you were never the difficult one. You were just the one I didn't know how to protect properly when you were small, and I've spent every year since then trying to make that right. I hope by the time you read this, it is right." There was a postscript at the bottom. It said, "There is a storage unit on the east side of town. The key is with Patricia. It's full of things I kept from your mother's house when we sold it after she passed. Her jewelry. Her books. Some things from when you were little. I should have given them to you years ago. I'm sorry, I waited. They are yours. They always were. I sat in that office for a long time after Patricia placed the key on the table beside the letter. Outside, the city was moving. Cars and voices, and all the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday afternoon. None of it felt ordinary. Everything felt like it was in slightly higher definition than usual, the way things look when you've been inside a long time and you finally step back into the light. My father had known. He had seen it before I was willing to, and he had built something quiet and solid around the edges of my life to hold me when the moment came. That was what he had done with his whole life. He had never been loud about anything important. He had just done the thing, steadily, year after year, until the thing was done. I thought about what it meant to inherit something. The word has always implied money in most conversations, but sitting there with that letter in my hands, I understood it differently. I had inherited his patience. His refusal to be panicked. His belief that the right move made slowly will always outlast the wrong move made fast. I had done this whole thing, the lie, the message, the Thursday meeting, the documents without raising my voice once. He would have appreciated that. Patricia walked me out when I was ready to go. At the door, she told me the formal resolution would be filed by end of week and I would receive everything within 30 days. I thanked her. She said it was her job. I told her it was more than that and she accepted the compliment without waving it away, which I liked. I drove to the storage unit that afternoon. The padlock was old and took a moment to open. And when I rolled up the door, the smell that came out was so specific and so particular and so completely from a part of my life I had thought was sealed away that I had to stand in the entrance for a moment before I could go in. My mother's rocking chair. Her bookshelf. 3 cardboard boxes with her handwriting on the labels: kitchen, winter. Maya's things from a house I remembered in pieces the way you remember a dream. Her jewelry box. The wooden one with the small brass handle that I used to open and close 100 times as a child just to hear the sound of it. I sat down on the concrete floor in front of the boxes and I just stayed there for a while. Some endings are not loud. Some of them are very quiet, and what fills the quiet is not satisfaction, exactly, but something more like recognition. The recognition that you have gotten through something that was designed to take something from you, and it didn't, and now you are standing on the other side of it holding something you didn't expect to find. I had gone into this ready to fight. I had come out holding a key to a room full of things my mother had touched. My father had been right. I had not lost anything. I had found out the truth about people who were never going to give me what I needed, and I had stopped waiting for it, and now that space was open for something else. I didn't know yet what that something else looked like. But I knew what it felt like. It felt like sitting on a concrete floor surrounded by your mother's handwriting, while the afternoon light came through the open storage unit door, and not being afraid of any of it. That was enough for now. That was everything.